Okay, a whole pile of events in this, 1900 game turn. And the penalty's getting lower. It doesn't mean much because with how high tensions have risen, a war can only go a couple of, well, actually, at the end of the first turn when you sail your ships out, essentially the war is over. So even if it gets down to the 1916 turn where there's zero penalty for war, there's still no potential gain. All you're doing is, I don't know, starting the war, which may happen anyway. Anyway, for our events, this isn't the order I rolled them in, but we had a bunch of them. What, 5 total. One's an unrest over here in Central America, which the Americans are going to have to throw some troops in to do. Conservative victory in Britain. Britain's going to get more colonial office money, but they have to spend at least 30 on constructing and maintaining new units. Maintaining old units, not counting their 30-point garrison in India. Well, I think they probably pay close to that. They may have to buy a couple extra units because of it. New Zealand pressure for Dominion. This one they're going to do, not because there's any great advantage. New Zealand's actually, in the original game, the worst because it only is next to Oceania. I think it's next to the South Pacific now as well in the errata, which was decided because there was no reason to have a Dominion in New Zealand if you had one in Australia or something like that. I don't know. This is the only reason you ever do them. Alaskan pressure for statehood, same thing. Alaska, state is equivalent to Dominion, is going to cost the U.S. more, but it means they can station troops in a less valuable location than the United States for free. But here's the interesting one. Boer oppression of the Uitlanders. That increased tension by 1. I already took that. And then the British can move in and take the Transvaal and Orange River Free State if no one else owns them. And that's going to be some significant fighting there. Some of these armies that I built up for the big war will come in handy because the Transvaal is got a high defensive rate value. And actually, I need to do this. I need to take this or this in order to complete my north-south route. I didn't have it built yet. I didn't realize it looked like it was built. We're also going to see England probably during negotiations breaking their alliance with Italy. It serves no purpose for them anymore, and raising tensions by 2 points does serve a purpose. Everyone else will keep theirs because they're just raking the equivalent victory points in from them. So it's always to their advantage. So for the most part, the hit in China was a leveling factor to everyone. One big exception, Japan. Japan lost everything. They should have, first of all, their biggest mistake was not having a decent garrison in Korea. You pay for it every turn, but hey, if, and the only if here, is if something shows up here in Manchuria, which we had one show up in, you're in trouble by just garrisoning it with one troop. If something shows up in Mongolia, it takes you 2 turns to get there. So you're in trouble with that too. So, yeah, I think we had Central China and Mongolia. So there's a significant number of spaces that you can't react to in time because the Chinese move first. And it takes you 2 rounds to get there. That was just a mistake by Japan. I don't think I've ever been in that position before where I made that error. I don't remember Korea ever being wiped out before. But once that was gone, I'm not so sure that Japan wanted to wipe out everybody else's stuff. What it really ended up coming down to was Burma and Indochina going. Now, it means Japan could get its fingers in all those, and I was thinking, that'll be easy enough, because everybody's going to be able to go into them, except for one problem. Japan lost so much, and they still have a protectorate, so they don't get a maximum roll. They got one down here. Oh, wait, they've got something else here. They've got 2 protectorates. Huh. I must not have that added correctly. Okay. Well, I got their income wrong. But because Japan, I'll come back and show you what they actually have. I wasn't counting Formosa. I forgot they had that. But because of what little Japan has and that they have a protectorate, they ended up with only $12 to invest, which means they can't even get into Korea. Now, we're going to see. My guess is Formosa will give them enough money to push them over that edge. But it does mean they're not going to get the ability to grow into Indochina, which they thought they'd have as well. So they lost too much of their income, like all of it, in terms of it was all trading with China. Now they can start reestablishing that, but it's going to be slower. The countries with piles of money are going to be able to shove in faster. So they definitely erred there. It's no big deal. They weren't going to win anyway. So now as we move into the movement status change, and Japan will have enough to get into Korea. They have 30-something bucks. We're at the stage where every player, it doesn't really matter the ordering anymore. So I'm probably going to dispense with the die roll largely. People are just going to be buying everything they possibly can at this point. It does matter a little bit, so I may end up rolling it, but that adds a bit of tedium and pain to my game. So I'll take care of a few key things that I know everyone's going to do. England going into here. Burma, obviously, which no one else can get to. Other places, well, everybody's going to go into Korea. You know, it's an 8-point area that's available. Anybody who can get there, which, if there's anybody who can't. Italy can't get there yet. So Italy will be shut out of Korea. But everybody else is going to get in there. Austria is going to expand into influences into Anatolia and interest in Bulgaria. Just basically grab everything they can. So now at the end of the placement phase, we see just the hideousness. What happens in Korea with so many people there. Elsewhere, less. For example, Indochina is a 3-way partitioning. Now, of course, with everybody in here, the value just drops and drops and drops. So here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's only a 3-value area because so many people are involved in it. I like that a lot better than the way the rules used to go, where it was an 8-value area. The truth is here, just nobody has anywhere else to go for the most part. We do have an interesting little situation here. The English are throwing themselves into Southwest Africa. That's not going to cause a war, but it is going to cause a reduction of the counter, which will be 2 points of tension. That'll push us up to 96, within the range that I think it's possible that an event can just toss us over. Something like Serbia defies Austria-Hungary, although that can still raise the tensions, but it has no other effect here. But yeah, we're kind of walking along the line here. If anybody's got anything they've got to drop down, they ought to do it now, but I didn't see any. We've got some upgrades. For example, Italy's growing to a possession there. But for the most part, there's still stuff to grab, so turning things to possessions isn't really economical yet for most countries. Italy actually has like 70-something bucks that they're going to be investing into victory points because they got nothing else they can do. They're short on fleets, and there's just nowhere else to expand that's safe. They could have, put in. They can put interests, but those are short term because somebody will stomp them after they're there. In fact, the Japanese would have stomped this if they had any kind of money, but they didn't even have enough to go into Indochina. They just settled for Korea. All right. Well, cool beans for Britain. Breaking the treaty with Italy cost 5 European tension. They jumped to that right away. It goes up to 99. At this point, this casus belli, which nobody's supporting, and everybody negotiates and says, okay, yeah, we're fine. But this one casus belli from Portugal is going to drive it over at nobody's fault. So the game's going to end. The game had another option of ending at this point, actually, though. Chinese resentment shot right back up to 100 with all that investment happening at once. You know, basically everything went back in immediately as it was before, and it could all disappear again. This time, there's very little chance of anything falling. There's a humongous set of armies, and they're all considered allied in Korea. I mean, like 30 strength points or anything. They don't just destroy things. The only question is, well, would somebody wander into Manchuria and destroy all those influences or whatever? And that would be, you know, kind of a bonus for Italy. This is bad for Italy, more than anyone else, because they were sitting on some 70-something bucks, assuming the turn wouldn't end at this point. Those would normally be converted into victory points, but they're not going to be because it's the game end. The game ends before the final turn end phase where you buy your victory points. So nobody gets any special bonuses. Nobody gets any alliance bonuses at this point. And it's really at the point of, let's just calculate up the final victory. Take a little break before that because this was kind of painful. Well, the end of game scoring was a little surprising to me, but not absolutely, because I knew the country that was winning was actually doing quite well. And I counted them last. However, what I didn't realize was a bit of a surprise, and something that I think needs to be taken into account when playing this. Anyway, what we have after resetting all the values here, then what I do is I add in all the values in the income record, come up with a total, and that's going to be doubled and then divided by the victory point divisor. And Austria and Germany combine their values together. Okay, great. On top of that, there were some bonus victory points which came into play. Let's take a look at the ones that actually did. The paths across Africa, France got 10 points for the east-west path, England 15 for the north-south. None of these others came into play, which is controlling many Chinese areas, controlling all of the Ottoman Empire, having defensive treaties with everyone, with half the other players, or more than half the other players. Great Britain didn't get a penalty. They didn't lose any of their India territory. Usually, in a game which proceeds like this, where Great Britain has no real, loses no war, they end up winning. The only exception to that is if one of the small powers manages to get a dominating position. And what we saw, Russia and Japan certainly did not, getting chased out of China, out of Korea, whatever. None of them gained anything tremendous. Italy is in a pretty good position. They did well enough with Egypt in a co-dominion and some other territories. The ownership of Madagascar. I've seen Italy win with this kind of situation, or something that looked similar to this, where basically they got more territories under their control, though. Basically, England and France allowed Italy to run away with the game in that game. That was when I game mastered. I've seen Italy win also when I played them, and I totally bamboozled England into being my buddy the whole game. So Italy's not doing terribly poorly, but when I started calculating the points, it was during the game, it was pretty clear they weren't going to be in the running for this. The total points for a game of along this line, I've seen these games go up really high when the war doesn't start and people just keep playing and playing and throwing their whatever money they made, because there's nowhere left to expand to, kind of into buying victory points. That's a really boring game when it happens. It just inflates everybody's victory values. And I was afraid that was going to happen here. Luckily, we were close enough on the European tensions track to drive things up. Okay, great. Let's look at some of the others here. Japan didn't get any of their advantages. They wanted to be the only person in China, including Hong Kong, or to hold Formosa, Indochina kind of alone, not have anybody else in there. They don't get those bonuses. Those are tough to get. I've never seen Japan get them, but I think it's possible for Japan to be played cleverly and win. The United States, well, no one has any control markers on the Western Hemisphere that they shouldn't. Which is to say, England's allowed to keep Canada and Newfoundland, and they're allowed to keep Guyana, and even Hawaii is allowed to go up for sale. But all those formed states elsewhere and the Spanish possessions, the United States wants to keep people out of them. And that's usually just a luck matter. If no unrest shows up anywhere, and we did have unrest here, but if no unrest shows up in the areas where everybody kind of congregates and gets influence, things are safe. If something like Brazil goes into unrest, the U.S. has a serious problem. It usually can't keep Britain from getting a protectorate there, which would be bad. War to Italy, well, that gets foiled because of the English in Egypt. They would have loved to cut a deal getting the English out of there. They couldn't ever manage it. Instead, and they were if you remember, the the French English-Italian conflict was prevented by England being allowed into both. England had the advantage in it, perhaps slightly. I don't know. And Italy really didn't want that, but France didn't want the war terribly much. We had the canal already taken care of. Nobody's got a special immediate penalty. So only the U.S. gets its points, and it gets 2 of them, actually. It gets 20 points of victories on its specials, and it almost always gets the China one. It's very hard. The only case where it doesn't is where some Chinese territory ends up going into unrest and the Western map. And again, these are luck dependent. If the U.S. can score some pretty decent points, 20 points, off of things that only come off of the event tables. If the events never happen that cause unrest in those areas, the U.S. gets some bonus points to pad, and I kind of count them in. The U.S. did very well against Spain, though. And I kind of had a think in my mind that, I think the U.S. is going to win this one at the final scoring. Now, there's nothing anybody could have done about this. The U.S.'s expansions were all pretty much protected ones. Their expansions against Spain, nobody can jump into that Spanish war that I know of, my understanding of it. Their gain here and the canal, those could have been tampered with, perhaps. My reading of the rule actually says you can't jump into an area in unrest with an influence marker on the turn it goes into unrest. Basically, only the people who have shown a prior influence there have any right to take it over or to have any say in it. I may be reading that wrong. I didn't bother to check back. The canal, the British should have probably challenged in that. It's always a mistake to let the U.S. build the canal. So then after we took those points and those bonus points, well, there's one other thing that gets added in here, which is everybody in the game gets a minus 40. It doesn't matter whether or not you're involved in the Great War. The only thing that matters is if you get blamed for the Great War. The Great War is going to cause a problem to everyone. So it's kind of a flattening effect in most games. In some games, that negative 40 actually matters because somebody gets blamed for the Great War. But in this one, nobody did. So I didn't even add it in. It's just extra calculation. If you're keeping some kind of score, how peaceful we all are or whatever, well, that can have an effect on things. Then we go over and start looking, and we just do a summation of these values. And what we see is these bonus, this row here, I used, this was the running total of victory points through the game, through purchase things. This one I used for the status markers, and this for the bonuses at the end of the game. You can see 10, 15, 20, not many here. Here, the big winner was the United States with 171 status marker points. Behind that, England with only 162. Remember, England lost Hong Kong. That's kind of a decent amount of points that they're usually able to get. Other than that, I don't know. England has a lot of influence markers that were not placed. They didn't manage to cover South America the way they would if the game had gone longer. So in some sense, the English didn't want the game to end at this point. They didn't realize this, but they probably shouldn't have gone in here and ended it. The extra points, that was worth wasn't worth the fact that they ran out of money. And they had a lot of money on the final turn, 200 and something bucks to expend, but they still had to use it all because there was so much open over in China with protectorates needing to be built, etc. Okay. And they had the Transvaal, the Boer War. So anyway, they end up the winner there, and the third place is Germany, whom I knew was doing well, but you see the English-French coalition is enough to stop someone like that. Germany needed a little bit more expansion. They don't have a lot left. They have a decent number of influence markers so that but they've covered most of the things they could reach. Once they got more trading fleets, they'd be able to expand somewhere else, say into the Pacific coast of South America or something. Or perhaps into the Black Sea. There are places where there are points that they didn't grab, but those weren't available to them yet. And they pretty much spent everything they had on this turn, expanding back into China. Anyway, when we totaled everything up, well, here's the big shocker. Belgium with 269. That means this game is going to be very hard for anyone to win with Belgium in it. Because Belgium did nothing. I mean, really. They failed their attempt to get the Congo, which they historically got, and then the only thing that they had, which anybody could possibly tamper with, well, there was a chance Portugal could go to a possession here, and the Belgian interest marker they had would be removed. And then the Belgians, who have an additional fleet, could recycle that counter. They could have put this, say, over here, and gotten a $7 influence marker instead. So they were still going to be in the lead there. Just huge amounts of points that they got off of sitting around reinvesting. It's that one divisor. I think that's too low for them, but I think they're just not interesting to play anyway, and I would strongly suggest not using them. So cutting them out of this, because I mainly played this as a 7-player game, because Belgium pretty much was out of the game after turn 1. We jump over and we see the United States is next with 223 because they had been able to stockpile victory points throughout the game. 32 points with the between the canal and some other things. And then they also actually exceeded Britain's points at the final game, both in terms of bonus points and in terms of area points. So they managed to exceed the British production, and I have no problem with that. I've seen the U.S. pull these kind of victories before when they get the Spanish War. Again, that is based on random chance too, though. It's possible that you never get the Spanish-American War. The United States is out of the running if that happens. But they do have a strong and solid position if events all kind of go their way. As we can see, they pulled off a victory that way. The other thing is, no one could do a damn thing about it. And that bothers me. It's one of the things with this game is that it really isn't something... You play it to win, but you know that your strategy or whatever probably isn't going to define the game. Of course, it's possible that a more bellicose Britain could have driven the tensions up faster earlier in the game. Say that French, Italian, English conflict had happened. Say the English had demanded that. They might have too. Well, England's taking a risk. They could lose big from that. But they're going to drive the European tensions up, and it's going to be an early end to the game. And maybe that's worth doing. I don't know. Most games that I've seen England has won, whether they stretch it out or play early. Beyond that, well, we're at 174 for Britain. Beyond that, we go to 169 for Germany, who, as I said, was doing quite well. And then 168 for Italy, who also was doing fairly well. Poor France is at 103. France misplayed this whole game. They bet their game on a war with England and then didn't have it when they had the chances. That's what it comes down to. The first chance they had for a war with England, the Italian situation, they certainly should have pushed because they were not investing in the influences that you need to generate your economy and generate early gains that you can build more off of. And they were just not able to push into. They didn't get much for it. They got the path across Africa early. Those two paths probably were a reason why Britain even lost. Focusing on them that early is probably a mistake. Most games, they kind of take place late in the game. Anyway, I'm going to close this up as the wrap, and I'll come back with a review.